I find myself still trying to find ways to reactivate the learning process, ways that match technologically. And I'm finding that talking into voice memos and then converting it and then posting it to YouTube with tunes to tube might be the most efficient process. This requires less editing and not as fast internet and things like that. And I'm still catching up on the notes I made on the train down here. And I made a note about how we can't see that thoughts are sound viruses and they're using us, versus seeing the information of light, that impression and perception of light, and that creates new brain cells with new sounds, new insights, and so perception and brain growth go together. And it seems that we paint pictures with our ears, hearing through the sounds of thought creates images instead of perceiving with our eyes to create sound. The sound of insight. And looking through thought, through sound viruses, as interpreters, it's kind of like trying to capture a mountain with an old point-and-shoot camera. The mountain is there, but the device that we're trying to interpret the mountain with is completely inadequate. And in the same way, our thought structures are completely inadequate for actually capturing the moment. And the moment can't be captured at all. The trouble is that we have this structure that is trying to capture the moment, but in terms of the past, so it's always inadequate. When you see the moment, it's so grand that that structure that tries to capture it disappears, like a moment of awe. And a lot of it is about how we use our eyes, what we look at. So are we looking at our phone screen? Are we looking at nature? And not just what we look at, but how we look at it. What are we using our technology for, or is the technology using us? Has technology become part of our thought structure that helps to use us even more? And I was on the train and somebody asked one of the Amtrak server guys how long he's worked for Amtrak, and he said 10 years. And he relayed a story that he said when he was 17, he decided that doesn't matter what job he has, he's going to like it. It's his attitude, it's not the job, it's him. And he also said that he likes the not as nice customers because he appreciates the nice ones more. So he had this really great attitude, and he was quite a magnificent creature. And I read something about transformational learning, and I feel like map consciousness is transformational learning induced by the universe. It's trying to get us to understand ourselves differently. But we have the mental illness beliefs superimposed on us, and behavioral or changes in lifestyle are attributed to that of a person with a mental illness instead of a transformational person, a person that's undergoing a transformation in the brain, in consciousness. And map consciousness changes what is alive in us. I'm sitting here listening to the birds, and I'm listening to the sound, and I sort of noticed that no matter how hard I try, I can't store that. Or even if I did listen to it, I wouldn't accumulate that sound and then replay it over and over in my head and then say it had some kind of meaning. And if I did, then I would only be able to see and hear that chirp outwardly as well as inwardly. And that limits my ability to experience the whole. Yet that's sort of what we do with language as we learn language. We store all those words internally because they have some kind of meaning. But with all those meanings, those old meanings playing in our head, we can't see and learn anew. If I was to sit and listen to the birds for all of eternity, maybe eventually my brain would understand what they were saying. But that wouldn't mean playing those bird sounds in my head would have any relevance to the rest of reality. Yet that human language, those human sounds that we have inside of us, make us only pick out that tiny bit of reality. And since that's an old structure, we're not learning anything new. And when we see something new, we give voice to something new. So we create new language, or we create new brain cells. So why are there some sounds we can just listen to? Yet the ones in our head, we can't just listen to them. We actually think they're telling us something about reality. When it would be the same as recording a bird song in my head and then replaying that and thinking that that had something to do with the next moments moving forward. Actually listening to bird sounds, to songs of nature, really listening can likely denature the coagulated thought structures in our brain. Because it's just listening for listening's sake. It seems like education is harvesting thought from books, teachers, etc. Whereas actual learning and perception is harvesting light, perception, insight, and giving a voice to it, to point to what you see. Though it's not the thing in itself. What are we pointing to with our thoughts, with our words? We're pointing to what's going on inside of us. And what if nothing's going on inside? The meaning is in the process, the processing. We become processors, makers of meaning, instead of absorbing authoritative beliefs, opinions, behaviors. This authority paints over our brain. It paints over our brain's ability to perceive with old sound structures. We live in a prison of sound that blocks our sight, that blocks insight. When we have no identity as that thought sound structure, who are we? Then don't we all have the same brain? The same capabilities to perceive? When we identify with mental illness, we seek security through its treatments. When we no longer identify with this belief structure, then what? I've experienced dissociation, losing all sense of myself, losing all sense of identity and identifying with my home, my family, my personality, and my body. But is this really disidentification? A clean slate? I just had an insight that this clean slate can only operate with love. Because if the clean slate is just an overflow of love, there's no problem. And that love acts without identification. So to me, I feel like this dissociation or disidentification state comes in. And it's scary. And then people rush in to actually put those thought structures back together. How does one operate from that clean slate without the need to recover any of it? The body is linear, but consciousness is non-linear. Thought and feeling dissipate energy, and this is the energy needed to see beauty, needed to be beauty, and it's why we can't see awe. When the mind screen is clogged up with electrons and energy of thought and sound, it can't see. There's noise. So I started reading something by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel about the $4 trillion altered state economy. And they had quite a fancy infographic. And I was thinking that the foundation of everything is really that we have a steady state economy, which is the reason that as a reaction we've felt we need these altered states of consciousness. And the steady state economy is education, religion, family, and it's all about being consistent, being a consistent personality, becoming a specialist of some kind. And we're programmed morally. So when we speak of altering our consciousness, who is it that's going to alter our consciousness? If our consciousness is a bundle of thoughts, isn't it just a bundle of thoughts trying to alter a bundle of thoughts? Where or who is this me that tries to alter consciousness? I feel that perception, insight, alters consciousness, and that our consciousness cannot not be altered. We try to keep a consistent image, a persona, and then we go around trying to alter our consciousness from the perspective of that persona that we've contracted and created a center around. We try to alter our internal experience of the outer because we're trying so hard to stay consistent internally, and that creates this scar tissue, and then we try all forms of activities and chemicals in order to break up that scar tissue and get some form of relief from this contrived consistency. We're not watchful of this natural flux and flow. And I was thinking about their infographic, and they have so many different things on there that alter consciousness. And I don't know if they delineated between flow versus hypnosis, being in a hypnagogic trance of sorts, mesmerized and trained. I think the infographic was about things that alter our consciousness in general. But even nature would alter our consciousness, sitting in nature more often, and they didn't necessarily put that on there. And I'm not sure if they answer the question of what should we even flow with. So it's great that the entertainment industry alters our consciousness, but is that something that has any value, really? Or is that more hypnosis and self-medication? I feel like a lot of us are flowing unconsciously with the thought structures that have been created to keep us in prison. There seems to be a flow of awareness versus a flow away from awareness. Flow isn't just about ego suppression. It must go with learning. If we use altered states as an escape, we're actually strengthening that self that we want to escape from. It sets up even more of a resistance to that tension of thought as the self. Whereas all that might be required is to just look at that self with some level of awareness, that it has no basis in reality. And if we aren't learning, aware, or creating, so flow what? Could almost say flow what? I thought of an analogy for our thought structures that trap us. In a way, it's like being surrounded by a swarm of bees. If we try to do something about the bees and swat at them, they'll just be more mad and they'll actually have more energy and sting us. Whereas if we're still, that whole structure of bees might leave swarming us and be sort of swarming in front of us, and we can actually just look at it swarming in front of us versus being actually attacked and affected by it. And then as we just watch that swarm of bees, one by one they start to just go about their way, and they're just these sort of individual organisms, whereas when we create this center of the self, it's like a swarm of bees. Whereas when we're watching, we might watch a bee go by our field of vision, but we don't have this swarm that's swarming around us or in front of us. So the more we are still and just watch that swarm in front of us, eventually the swarm goes about its own way, one by one, and there's no actual swarm anymore. There's just bees. So if there's a swarm, that's like the self, the me. Whereas if there's just a bunch of individual bees and every now and then they fly by in consciousness, there's no self. They're just thoughts going by in consciousness, just like it's just a bee flying by in time and space. But we have a swarm in our inner time and space of bees that are stinging us. And we take that whole swarm of thoughts together to be the self. The swarm is the self. But when we're still, there's no swarm and there's no self. There's just that stillness. And a bee might go by, a thought might arise in consciousness, but it's not energized by identifying with a self. Because if it's identified with, that bee sort of gets drawn in magnetically, and all of a sudden after a certain number of thoughts, there's a swarm of bees. There's a self. If those thoughts are energized together and collected. And thoughts are kind of like roads. They're human structures for driving on them conveniently, whereas insight is like the nature in between the roads. We pay attention to our thoughts and we identify that with them. And that's like being identified with going from one city to the next city. And that has value externally, but we translate that internally, and we're on these roads of thoughts in our mind, and we're not seeing that the whole expanse of consciousness and perception, even the whole globe might be covered with 0.00001% road. Yet by only focusing on our thoughts and thinking that has something to do with reality, it's like thinking that external reality is just roads. So can we get off the roads of thoughts? It's like we're walking on a road of words, and we're not actually walking on the ground made of light and matter. So even when we're walking on the ground, we're sort of in our head walking on this imaginary road of our thoughts, and it's not congruent with the here and now, and that can only create disorder. We're seeing through the distortion of the self.